Now let's look at vector operations. Since it's not like your regular physical quantities wherein you just add them or you just subtract them, multiply them, divide them, vectors have a certain way or complications in how we actually operate them. Okay, so there are two ways to do that. We have graphical and we have analytical. Here in this lecture, I will just be showing to you, in the graphical sense, different illustrations in this space. However, when you start working on it on your paper, on your in your problem sets, I'm expecting that you will be using your ruler, because your ruler will tell you how long or how short it is in reality. So you have to be using your scale. Okay, so if 1 kilometer is equal to 1 centimeter in your ruler, so if you have 5 kilometers in your problem, therefore the length of your arrow should be 5 centimeters. So that's your graphical way of representing your vectors. So here, we will be looking now at graphical way to add your vectors. Okay? So adding vectors graphically. So to add vectors graphically, basically, you just have to connect the tail and the heads. Okay? So we call this the head to tail method. Okay? Head to tail. So if you notice that the head of vector A is connected to the tail of vector B. So head to tail method. So if you want to add vectors A plus vector B, okay, so you have to put vector A here and connect the head of vector A to the tail of vector B. Okay. So that's now vector C, which is now A plus B. So to add them, so you just put from the tail of vector A to the head of vector B. Now that is your vector C. That's how we represent it graphically. Now, Mr. Maramag, how do you put that in number, or how do you solve that? Okay, later on, we'll have an example of solving or adding vectors graphically. For now, let's look at what if you reverse it? Like, for example, you put the head of vector B to the tail of vector A. Is that even possible? Actually, yes. In the same way that 1 plus 2 is equal to 3, okay, 2 plus 1 is also equal to 3. But this is only because, this is only due to the general sense of the vector. Things will get complicated a little bit later. Okay, I'm sorry, but this is how it is talaga. Okay, so yes, we can flip it. Like if you want to put the head of vector B to the tail of vector A, you can do that. And then if you notice, same lang yung vector C or resultant vector mo, right? So it's basically on the same length. It has the same angle. Okay, so that's for adding vectors graphically. Yeah, so I have here another example. So for example, we have here a vector C that's going to this direction. This is vector C. Okay, and you want to add vector D, which is basically going to this direction. D, not B. Yan. Okay? So if you want to add these two vectors, what we do is we just connect the head and the tail. Therefore, this vector is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks. Vector C here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is vector C. Okay, and then we'll be adding vector D. So vector D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So vector D. Okay, vector D. Yeah. So now we have vector C and vector D being added graphically, and then you'll just get the resultant vector. Okay, now let's call this vector E. So vector E is equal to C, vector C plus vector D. Now, how do you get these quantities? Well, you just have to use your ruler to get how long vector E is, and then you can use your protractor to find the angle of vector E. Okay? So that's how you add vectors graphically. Yeah. So that's head to tail method. Another method that I think we need to learn is the parallelogram method. Parallelogram method is that you put the two vectors together, and then you create a parallelogram so that you can get the resultant vector in the middle of it. Okay? So we can also add two vectors by placing them tail to tail and constructing a parallelogram. So tail to tail siya. So look at tail to tail. Okay, you combine them here. And then you make a parallelogram that is parallel to vector B and a parallel to vector A. And then after that, okay, may tawag dito sa math yung nasa gitna. Okay, I'll just type it here. Pagka maalala ko, I have to search that. Okay, and that's the resultant vector, the one in the middle. Okay, so that's adding vectors graphically. It's from head to tail, head to tail method or parallelogram method. Okay, so now how about subtracting vectors? Subtracting vectors is done by flipping your vector. Okay. So if we want, for example, subtracting B from A, so you have vector A minus vector B. Bakit equal yan? A minus vector B. If you want to do that, okay, it's actually equal to vector A plus the negative of vector B. So what happens again when we put a negative vector? Diba? We flip it. Okay, so you just flip. So if you notice, this vector is now flipped to the other direction to be ready for subtraction. Alright, so that's subtracting vectors.